All right, good morning. Looks like we are live now. So this morning, again, if you don't remember from last week, I'm Molly Marshall. This is Allison Smith. Not sure which side you're on. Allison, you want to chime in with a little bit about you really fast before we get started?
Yes. So Allison Smith with Allison Smith Design. I've been designing projects for 30 years or so, for a long, long time. We have a studio in downtown Portland. It's great. It's an old Victorian that we really enjoy working out of. But it's a really big roller coaster ride. I do international work. I do work all over the United States and predominantly based here in Portland. We do commercial and residential, so we're all across the board, and we do a lot of remodeling. So, but we've been established for a long time, and we have a lot of great support and great thinkers in our think tank to help problem solve and do all kinds of fun stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah. Excited to hear what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, this morning we are here to kind of break down kind of four main design styles. So today we're going to be talking about traditional design, transitional, modern, and eclectic. And you're going to just kind of help walk us through some mood boards we put together and kind of point out, like, this is what makes something traditional, this is what makes something modern. So I think we're going to start with traditional this morning, and I'm going to put it up here on the screen, and then you can just kind of talk us through it.
For sure. Okay. Yes. So one of the things I feel like is that people do have a hard time identifying what it is that they really are, what they identify with. And magazines do a fair enough of a job to say like traditional magazine or, but there aren't, they don't label all of them. Some of them are more modern. But anyway, we have come up with a way to kind of help people identify who they are through a quiz, which I'll go into more. But we're going to talk about traditional right now and what makes this traditional and what makes homes feel more traditional. So without the architectural aspect, we're just going to hit on the way things feel in terms of furniture and accessories and so on. So in this situation, we're looking at furniture, elements within a home, like your faucet there, and accessories and lighting. So traditional is basically what is new of what is old and has been around for eons. And they all are basically little spin-offs of historical pieces. Like the chair, for example, has a traditional sense from something that would have been perhaps an antique, and it looks like it may have been a period piece. The shape of things tend to be soft and they have a lot of movement. The materials tend to be more of what you've seen, meaning traditional is in materials that have been around, whether it be like marble or in this situation, we have a really pretty insignet tile that you can see with a pattern on it. The leg on the furniture piece, which is really a bed piece, has notches and little kinds of nuances. So there's a lot of layers to traditional, lots of texture, and all done again with a sense of historical patterns, whether it be like a paisley or what we call a matelassés or damask. These are all patterns that have been around historically forever and ever and ever. And so people who appreciate that old sense of those things will be gravitating towards traditional design. So let's look at the next page so we can kind of go more onto showing how that approach works for more traditional. So again, we have more pieces where we have like the Chesterfield. Now that's a little bit more of a contemporary version of a Chesterfield, but a Chesterfield has been around for a very long time, and that's the sofa that I'm talking about. Again, the patterns tend to be brocaded together. So these are the things that make this traditional, and people tend to have a comfort in traditional goods, if you will. It makes them feel like everything's familiar. I gravitate to traditional things as well because I really respect the historical references to them. So again, all these little parts kind of make up a traditional feel as we get going. But this right here is, this is our transitional group. And I just messed that whole thing up. But anyway, the traditional one has all those elements that are much more, yes, thank you, Molly, for showing the difference. So the transitional one has a bit of what would be like little modern elements and twists of things that are newer to the traditional, where with the traditional, it's a little more refined and a little more rigid, and you want to stay within the lines. And our transitional has some quirky, kind of fun, unique little bits in there. So for example, on the transitional side, you'll see that they've taken and put in the mirror that has kind of a traditional look, but they've added a modern element to it by putting kind of a layer on it. The table is a demi-lude, which means it's kind of a half table. That's a traditional table in the way that it's used, but it has a modern bend to it. So it's just taking old and then adding this twist of new modern to it. And that's where we come up with this transitional, if that makes sense. So let's see, our next one is going to, I believe we were just saying it was going to be eclectic. And so let's go into.
Yes. Let me grab the eclectic one for you really fast.
Sorry,
might just take a minute. No, it's fine. We've got
Yeah.
more going on this week than we normally do. We're trying to share, we're getting fancy and we're sharing some media. So you want to do eclectic?
Right.
Okay, so here comes eclectic. In just a second. All right.
I love technology. It makes me happy. Okay, so one of my favorite things about eclectic is I naturally gravitate to enjoying designing it because I grew up with an eclectic group. My family, we lived in Mexico, so we had all kinds of unique things, and then we also had all this stuff from the States. So that's exactly what it is. Eclectic is like merging a lot of different cultural design together and creating a kind of montage, if you will, of design. And it's fun. It can also be a little daunting because it also can look like a bunch of junk together. So you have to sort of choose a star player in eclectic design. So you don't want to overdo, you don't want to underdo. There's kind of a fine line. And with overdoing it, like I said, it gets busy. So I always say less is more. So maybe what you have with an eclectic kind of situation is that the materials in your home are a little more clean lined, or there's less, action going on. So maybe it's just the star player of your house is the beautiful flooring that you have. Perhaps it's a tile, or it's a really pretty colored hardwood floor. So then you would layer that with an eclectic kind of grouping of pieces. And again, it's like a bunch of all kinds of things that are from all different sorts of places. But then again, like we talked about last week, a palette would help tie it all together so it doesn't feel strange. And in this situation, there's really no palette. We're just showing you like a montage of what eclectic looks like. So if I was going to create a palette with eclecticness, I would take that poof, if you will, in the corner, and it would become kind of part of my accent to my predominant color, which we talked about last week. And then all these other things would be little bits of layers that we'd add onto it. So Molly, while we're doing this, do you have any questions about some of this stuff that I'm saying that might be something you'd like to add, or your expression when you see this that helps me kind of explain more why it's eclectic?
That's a good question. Maybe speak a little bit more to when you said, well, I wasn't on screen, but I literally like laughed out loud when you said that, it could get really overdone and like crazy and then all of a sudden just look really, really bad. And so I think maybe one of my questions is kind of like, where where is that line? Like, how do you then like limit that or like focus as you're selecting things to make sure that you don't cross that line? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that people don't realize that when they see things and why they gravitate them and they say, oh, that looks nice, whether they appreciate whichever genre we're talking about, whatever they're attracted to, there are little tiny rules in decorating with accessorizing, and I don't and stuff. There's sort of a rule of three in when it comes to like the transitional, the eclectic, or even in modern. If you try to, and then that's not always the case, but this is kind of how it helps. The rule of three is like things become now asymmetrical. So symmetrical would be like if you have a mantle and then you're putting two of everything the same, let's say, on either side. That would be a very traditional way of creating balance, and that would look purposeful, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Not in an eclectic situation, you would maybe only have a mirror, or like here's a good example. In that photo where it shows the horns of the bull, there's sort of a rule of three going in on the, I guess, the right side of the screen. I don't know if people see it, but on one side we have a rule of three, and there's a vase, and then there's and that is just enough. Where if you were to put, let's say, 15 things on this, you wouldn't be really accentuating the positive part of all of this. A big jumbo, if you will, and it would be hard to focus. So by having the balance of, on the one side, the rule of three, and everything being kind of at a different height, and then something smaller and lower on the other side, what you've done is sort of frame and complement it around this large scale image. So
that makes sense.
It does it? Okay, good. Because some of it is just intuitive. It's just what we designers, but there is this method to the madness. So
what you're saying is, if I can maybe like just recap to make sure that I understood it right, was that, so if you were doing something traditional, you might go a little more balanced, like even numbers, because it's a little more on like the formal side.
Yes.
So then like each design style kind of has its own little like rules like that things that can kind of keep you within theme, I guess, if you will.
Yes.
Sort of.
So
okay.
That way you've addressed it, and not to say that it's 100%. There's some of it's just, what does this feel like? But overcrowding an area and making it feel too full is, and now some people, I ran into a designer one time. I was a rep for a little bit for Craven and Lee Joffa, which was a really great textile line.
Okay.
And I was amazed at this talent of this gentleman's house that I went into to help him figure out fabrics that he wanted. And he had so much going on in this house. Now, for him, it was very stimulating, and it calmed him, and he loved it. And there was so many things. I felt like I was stepping inside his mind when I was looking at it. Like, wow, this is a genius designer.
Yeah.
I think for most people, too much makes them feel uncomfortable, or they feel that they're being put upon by too much design.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah.
There are a little bit, like I said, with this, with an eclectic, it is so loosey-goosey because you're putting all these weird kind of different unique things together, and you want to make sure that you just don't overdo it, and you want to kind of create that rule of three, if you will, when you're accessorizing. Or the balance of things being scaled, where you have sort of that 1, 2, 3, and then maybe 1, 2, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That's really important, because I could go on and on and on, and then people are going to be like, so the next one is modern, and this is I love all these genres. They're so much fun. Let's show people.
Get that one up here.
So I think this is really key. There is a big difference between modern and contemporary. Contemporary is basically of today, if that makes sense, things of today. Modern is clearly modern. Modern is a design style that is usually very clean And it has a lot of separation between color. It's in the sense that it likes to be bold, but then at the same time, it can be considered monochromatic or muted. But really, it's about everything being very defined. The lines are very clear. They're not emerging, if you will. And the textures tend to be consistent. And the cleaner the lines are, the more modern it feels. White tends to be an over-encompassing aspect of modern. So, you know, they also tend to be clear, clean colors. And you see a modern element, usually it's, you know, the whites, the blacks, the grays, the reds, and all in terms of non-muddy colors, but very clear. And that to say that there's an absolute, again, there's very clever designers and people that are out there that can figure out how to make something modern and keep it modern. And that's their mission, and still break those rules that I'm talking about. But when you see it, typically you see, like I say, very simplistic definition of lines. Again, you know, whether it be just a circle or an oblong, and you can see that there's, I don't know, again, a boldness to it, and there's a strength to it, and sometimes it even appears more masculine, if you will. So it's also a style that, if not done well, can come off looking very cheap. And I mean as in flimsy and not put together. So it's really important to me, while this sounds really contradictory of what I'm going to say, that when you do modern timeless. So in the sense that, you know, that because it's expensive, all these things are expensive to do. When you have this feel of just everything being modern, you want to make sure that you don't buy everything that's on trend that's modern. You can mix it again, but like your fundamental pieces, like your sofas, and again, the materials that you choose, as long as they are consistent in the palette that you've chosen and they have a sense of integrity about them, you can mix some of the, I guess, other icons that go with it, like that clock, for example, in the image, or some of those things, and not have to be as expensive. And the same thing's true for traditional. I don't know if you ever remember the store, the Bombay store, but that was one of my most I had a very hard time walking in there, because it made everything that I really gravitate to in terms of the way that its shapes and its sizes and all that, and it gave it it was just overkill, and the materials looked cheap, and everything was kind of ticky-tacky. And so it didn't last for very long, but people really liked it because it was like an inexpensive way to get your fix of traditional. The same thing happens in a modern world. And again, it's very tricky. You want to do it in a way where, again, you have your pieces that are anchored in. Maybe you spend a little more money, for example, on that sofa, and you make sure you have a really beautiful fabric on it, so that come down the road, you can do a mix of things with that, whether it be area rugs or pillows or interchange. Also, the cool thing today is there's some new fabrics out called Krypton, and they are impervious to being stained. And so you can get away with doing more whites in materials and fabrics than ever before, and not have to worry about how they're going to get decimated by a glass of red wine or coffee or something horrible, or even little people and what they like to do. So anyway, so this is how, you want to kind of stay away from, again, doing it inexpensively. But I'm not saying you have to break the bank. I'm just saying that with modern, it's hard to pull it off if you really just go towards every trend and you don't pay attention to making sure that you keep the lines clean, and that you don't source all your things from the same place, if that makes sense, and that you kind of keep it consistent. I don't know. You have to stick with the theme. You don't want to all of a sudden throw something in there that isn't right. So do you have any kind of questions about this particular genre?
I think that every parent needs a Krypton couch for sure. I was like, ooh, that sounds amazing. No matter what color of your sofa.
No, like it opened the door to light colored furniture, which
yeah,
I got so bored with black and chocolate and gray and dark and mushroom and more dark and then that, so that people and they look at this white sofa and go, that's so pretty, and I'm like, I know, but
never. Yeah.
Life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you can seriously, the fabrics are amazing, and the stuff just comes right out. It's a great, and it's actually done in environmental fashion, which is hard to believe, but they had it in a. So yes, everybody should own some sort of Krypton.
I was trying to think of questions. I like what you said about just everything is very defined. I think, when I look at something, I see modern and it's like, okay, that's modern. But when you say that, I'm like, okay, that's why, is because there isn't a lot of overlap. Like everything is very separate. So that was really helpful. And then I also liked what you said about like, doing modern, but like timeless. So I don't, is it possible off the top of your head to give an example of something that like just maybe like speak to one piece, like a clock, like what would make it timeless versus of the moment?
I'll use another example. I think part of the thing is that, again, all of these genres, you have to start off with sort of, again, I call it the star player. Okay, what are your materials? What's the most of what you have? What is your palette? We talked about that last week. And now we're just basically starting this other process. This is overlaying on top of all those things that we're all assuming when we look at this exist. So just throw these together. This is great the way that we've shown this image of this cool modern thing, but where's it going? Where's it living in, right? So let's assume that you have all your modern pieces for your materials selected, and let's assume that you've got a palette. So to keep it timeless would be, okay, if I go really wild on some obscure chairs, and in 10 years from now, they've lost their, and you spend a lot of money on that, that could be, to me, a dangerous way, unless money is no object.
Sure.
Most of the time it is. So let's just say you come up with a very, and you're calculated about this, you come up with a beautiful white table that has, just an hourglass base. That is less likely because that's a classic. That's an old modern table. It's been around. And you kind of look at the classics, like from the even Art Deco classics, which is considered the modern of its day. You start looking at those things and saying, okay, well, this is modern, because modern doesn't necessarily have to mean new. Contemporary is new, but modern could be old. So Picasso is an artist that's been around, and it's not today. It's not brand new, but there's timeless things about his artwork that is modern, but it's timeless. And the hourglass white table, which came out in the 60s, is a timeless table that will never go out of style. But maybe if you stick some crazy lucite chairs around it, those might start to lose their luster. And
sure. Okay.
Key pieces, and remember that when you're doing a modern product. Like, for example, I would say like this coffee table in this image doesn't appear to me as something that's timeless. That is a very trendy piece of furniture. It's new, it's cool. I hope it's not super expensive, because that's what I try to do, is say, oh, we can add these fun pieces. But I look at that sofa and I say, that is basically a takeoff of a timeless, great bench seat sofa with modern things to it. But I see that as being more timeless and not having to worry about it going wildly out of style. because that's the thing about modern is it's kind of catching up on a trend. But you can do timeless modern. And again, contemporary is the things that would be like that coffee table. That's kind of a trend of today. It's got the wood grain in it that has the sense of what looks like a mechanic's wheel. That table has a glass smoke top on it. I wouldn't consider any of those things timeless. Those are all just kind of fun materials, and they're creative and they're clever, so it's more contemporary. Does that make sense?
So yeah, and but that's kind of, I think, something interesting that you just distinguished between is you said, because I think, a lot of people, we get on Pinterest and we look and we see like, all these, beautiful rooms that are they're very trendy. And there's a difference between design and trendy. And some trendiness can live in design, but like true design isn't just having like the latest whatever collection of whatever in your house.
I mean, that's how I approach it. It's more like, I try to look at it also from an impulse of not just what you like, but how long is this thing going to last? How much does it cost? What does it bring? What's the value of it? How long will I really appreciate this piece? Or how long will my client really appreciate this?
Yeah.
And, my favorite stories are where I've had clients that were, they may be on their 5th home. They've made changes in their life, they've had to move or whatever. And buying pieces of furniture that I know, helping them in that process, that I know would go well from one place to another, or another, knowing that they like gravitate to, let's say, transitional or a modern, because I made sure that they weren't super trendy.
Yeah.
Maybe the pillows or maybe the area rug was kind of fun and trendy, but those are things that don't break the bank to change out, where your sofa and the pretty dining room table and those heavy anchored pieces,
your core pieces, right?
Or like, is this going to look great in 10 years from now? Now, not to confuse everybody, but there are lots of designers that are very good, and I do this all the time, where we mix these modern things in, and we throw in, like in this scenario, I put some contemporary pieces in here with this modern element. But like, for example, that table is what I consider contemporary. It's modern, but it's today. Where that piece of artwork is a classic, timeless piece of artwork.
Right.
That's really something that 15 years from now, I don't see it as a trend. It's a piece that people appreciate with the, longevity to it. So we do that, and that's something, but for somebody who's just trying to figure it out, I think that if they were to look at it and remember some of these tips, or even understand them, or even better yet, and not that we need to wrap this up, I don't know, but we're kind of getting there. We have this quiz, and about the quiz, but the quiz started, we had a paint line for a long time, and it helped people identify what colors really suited them, and to help them figure out a palette. We talked about that last week. But we've got a quiz now to help you identify whether you gravitate to traditional or eclectic or transitional, and help you to start identifying. And once they take the quiz, they really go, wow. We've had comments where people go, I'm modern. I didn't, they act surprised. It's really cool. So it is something that makes sense, and it helps people. People like definition of what they should go to look for when they're shopping for things, or they're trying to figure out how to design their spaces. I think that there's so much, like we talked about last couple weeks ago, there's almost too much for people. Like you see Pinterest, and I think it's cool that it's available, but I also think it's sort of daunting, because it's like, what am I supposed to do? How many sofas are there? How many fabrics? There's just so many. And so hopefully these helping people figure out what their style is or what they gravitate to through taking the quiz helps them. So
Yeah, and the quiz is actually very easy to access, easy to remember. We can drop the link below this video when we end our live, but if it's just Allison Smith Design /quiz. And if you take the quiz and you get to the end and figure out what your style is, there's a little place where you can enter your email address. And the mood boards that we were sharing today are actually what we send at the end of the quiz. So if you're traditional, you get like a little 4-page ebook about traditional, and that mood board is in there, transitional, modern, and eclectic. So you can actually walk away with something tangible, and there's some text in there that kind of talks about each style as well. So things we covered today were a little more in depth, but you can have a little takeaway to go along with today's session. So
that's right. And if you decide you want to hire our team to help you actually pull all that together, and you don't want to try to do it yourself, we can do that too, for sure. So it's really great. Thank you. I'm sorry, we're kind of flubbed up and I'm trying to figure out the technology and all this. But we got it.
We'll get better every week. We're getting fancier. We're getting better at it.
Thank you, Molly. I really appreciate you doing this. This is really good stuff. It's something I look forward to and think about. I get all excited, like, oh, this will be fun to talk about.
Yeah. And so we'll be back in 2 weeks. We're doing this every other Saturday. So we'll kind of take a look at the questions that we get on social media and through the contact form and stuff like that, and come up with another awesome topic that kind of breaks these concepts down for people. So
yes. Well, enjoy your day.
You too.
Thanks for doing this again, and I really appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, please bring them on and we'll work on them.
Send them along. All right. Awesome. Well, have a good rest of your day. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.